Eliza Solender is a nationally recognized authority on nonprofit and small business real estate issues. As president of Solender Hall, Inc., she has worked with hundreds of nonprofit organizations and small businesses to help them achieve their real estate visions. Solender is the author of numerous articles on commercial real estate and organizational communication, and is a frequent speaker on real estate, management, volunteering, leadership development, and community issues. Eliza has been involved in many national, community, and civic organizations through the years. She is past president of the Board of Trustees of the Dallas Museum of Natural History, which is now the Perot Museum. She has held leadership positions for many nonprofit organizations, such as the Family Place, Greater Dallas Mental Health Association, the President's Research Council at University of Texas Southwestern Medical Center, and National President of Commercial Real Estate Women. She is founder and past chair of the Crew Foundation. Currently, she's on the board of directors of Origin Bancorp, a publicly traded company, and holds memberships in the Dallas Assembly, the Real Estate Council, and the North Texas Commercial Association of Realtors, as well as the Meadows Museum Advisory Council. Eliza, thank you so much for being with us today on the podcast about fundraising.
You're most welcome.
Our paths have crossed many times through the years, and I'm glad to say that they still do. Really admire you and your work from a distance, sometimes closer up, like when I took your real estate class, but we'll talk about that in a minute. So I want to start with the beginning of Eliza. You started your real estate company in 1991, but you were working in real estate long before that. How did you get started?
So my background really is in human resources. My father had been an executive at what was the Dallas Times-Herald. And when they sold the paper, he stayed for a while, and then he left the paper and went into real estate. And I watched that and I thought, I don't really want to be in a big corporate setting. I want to be my own boss. So I thought, I'll just go into real estate. My father did. So I went to him and asked him if I could work with him. And we did. And what I discovered was that he liked to do big transactions. And they didn't close maybe for years. And I needed money. And my father said, well, just, why don't you just go out and do leasing? I said, I don't know anything about leasing. So I met a woman named Margaret Hall, and she was leasing a large project in downtown Dallas. And without knowing each other very well, we said, what, let's go into business together. So we formed Solender Hall. And the project she was leasing sold, so she was unemployed. So we sat there and said, okay, what are we going to do? We're two women in a very male-dominated industry. And I said, I just don't, let me think. I thought, wait a minute, I've been on all these nonprofit boards. Let's specialize in nonprofits. And Margaret said, well, why would we do that? And I said, well, I've had some pretty bad experiences with real estate brokers. So this might be our chance. So what happened was that kind of pushed me into this, because I had been going along a different track, was that I was on the chairman of the board of a nonprofit, and we wanted to sell a property in a very downtown Dallas. Well, it's actually across from the Crescent. And we sold the property. We'd hired a broker to represent us. And when it was over and we paid the broker's commission, I went to the broker and said, would you buy a ticket to our fundraising event for $100? And he said, no. I said, you're not going to buy a ticket to our fundraising event? And he goes, no, we don't do that. And I thought, wow, if I had been a business, he would have taken me out for dinner. He would have taken me to a football game, but not a ticket to our fundraising event. And so I thought, we need brokers who care about the nonprofit community and are willing to make even a small investment in it. And that's when the idea, as I said, with Margaret came about, and I thought that's why we should specialize in nonprofits, because we understand what's going on the nonprofit side of the table as well as the owner side of the table. So that was the beginning of the business. And we sent out 250 letters to different nonprofit executives and said, we had this business, we understand nonprofits, call us, give us a chance. And the phone started ringing. And it's never stopped, thank goodness. So it was really special. So anyway, that's how we started it. Eventually, Margaret, after a few years, decided to move to Friday Harbor and live on a boat. And so I bought her out. And fortunately for me, I have a wonderful husband who is an attorney and is also a real estate broker and specializes in commercial real estate. So he has been not my partner in the business name, but he is very definitely a part of the business as well and has helped it grow.
That's a great story. I always love an origin story.
It's fun. It's fun.
TREC, which is the Real Estate Council, offers a course on real estate for nonprofits.
Right.
I participated in that course several years ago, and you were one of the speakers. Why should someone in the nonprofit sector take this course? And also, I know you were involved in developing this course, so you could fill us in on that as well.
So it's hard to believe this, but yes, I developed the course and I basically teach it, put it together every time. So it's unbelievable. We're starting, this is our 16th year. I'm shocked, actually really shocked. But when the Real Estate Council came to me and said, would you be interested in doing this course? I thought about it and said, that's a good idea because people don't talk about the fact that real estate is the second largest budget item for every nonprofit after personnel. And the course, what it does is it teaches real estate executives all about buying, selling, and leasing real estate. But overall, what it does is it gives the executive the big picture of the entire real estate process so that they better understand how to handle the real estate, better plan for it, and how to really meet their organization's goals through real estate. So we have 5 modules that you took, and they're all taught by, I bring in experts, I facilitate it, I ask all the questions, and we cover things like managing board expectations, planning, contracts, leasing, construction, and then probably the most important class, I shouldn't say this, but is about finding the money to do all your real estate projects. And that money class is really important, Diana, because from when I started this business in 1991 to what it is today is totally different for how real estate transactions are done. In those days, you went out, you did a little capital campaign, you raised all the money, and you bought the property. Today, real estate is a lot more expensive, and so that means that the nonprofit executive has to put together what's called this capital stack that has many different layers of funds to make this transaction happen. So most of these transactions involve bank debt, maybe some type of governmental funding of all kinds of sources, as well as philanthropy and funds that the nonprofit has put together. So to give you an example, one project we just did, Oak Lawn Place, which was done by the Resource Center along with a developer, Matthews Southwest, and Volunteers of America. That was done it's an 84-unit apartment complex. It's affordable for LGBTQ plus tenants. All there are seniors and on the affordable housing. There are 8 different sources of funding for that project. Oh. So it's very complicated, and it wasn't something that a fundraising consultant could handle because it meant that the developers had to understand all these sources of capital. So when you have 8 different sources of capital to do roughly $30 million project, it's a new game. It's much more complicated. So you can imagine that in that class, that's a big topic. How, at the end, how do we do this? How do we put all the money together to get it done? And I think the problem is that if you hire a fundraising consultant whose specialty is just doing philanthropic campaigns, that's an important part of the capital stack, but it's no longer the only part of it.
Mm-hmm.
And so there are not that many fundraising consultants that know how to talk to banks, how to arrange that bank financing, how to go after new market tax credits or low-income housing tax credits, or apply to the Federal Home Loan Bank for money. I mean, it's so much more complicated. So that the executive director is now finding themselves having to hire a variety of consultants to help them do this. So that's so different from what it used to be.
Yeah, now you've made me really curious about that. Something I'm not familiar with. You've sort of talked about this, but I'm going to go ahead and ask it again. Maybe you have a different answer. You've put together many real estate deals with various nonprofits, as you've described. But I want you to, if you would share with us one that really stands out with you. You just mentioned one that you just wrapped up, or maybe you're still involved with. But in your career, there's bound to be other really good stories.
So yes, Oaklawn Place was wonderful. And I think the one that's why it's so intriguing right now is because the board and their CEO, C.C. Cox, had to see the vision, because I presented them with an area that was, quite honestly, was a dump. I mean, it was horrible. It had 40 boats, abandoned boats, at least 40 abandoned cars. It was filled with trash, and there were well over 40 feral cats. So you're talking about a place that people would look at immediately and go, oh, I can't do this. But the Resource Center and their board saw it, got the vision, saw the location. It was only half a mile from their corporate headquarters, and took a deep breath, went forward. It was 5 different transactions that had to close simultaneously. And then we had to get the cars and the boats and the junk and the cats all off the site. And by the way, the cats were taken care of by the SPCA, so they're fine. But it was an incredible process to do that. And what was so impressive was everybody could see the possibilities at this site. So for me, it's when you have these boards and executive directors that can see the possibilities. So what are other examples? The Dallas Children's Theater is a former bowling alley.
My favorite.
Okay. And we looked and looked and looked, and we found this bowling alley. It had only been on the market 2 weeks. And in fact, it was supposed to be for lease. We went in, it had been totally gutted, and all that was left was just a bowling ball, which was so funny. So the board was like, should we do this or not? And the chairman of the board said, everybody, we're going to go in there and we're going to look at this. We're going to stand here and visualize it. And they did it on a hot August afternoon. There was no air conditioning. The sun was beating in, and they gave in. But it was a smart decision. And so they have this beautiful site on 6 acres with plenty of parking, and that worked out really well. Another one is the SPCA that's on I-30 near here, and that was a former printing plant. And the head of the SPCA saw the possibilities, saw that it was a location that was right on the highway, and said, you know what, this is going to be a great place for animals and for people. And so they purchased the property and did a wonderful renovation of it. In fact, the part that had been the management office, I don't think they changed that much at all. So they did that with the SPCA. And then another one that's been really wonderful, that's actually not too far from this studio, is Kessler School on 10th Street. And that is a former church that Kessler School came in and renovated the building and redid the whole outside, put in playing fields. I mean, actually, it's not historic, but They took it back to a lot of its early historical elements. And what was so wonderful is this poor church building had really fallen apart. And I think it was disturbing to the neighborhood. And the neighborhood saw the vision that the school was going to have for the property, had, and 100% supported it. So it went through the zoning process with 100% neighborhood support. And I think the neighbors are thrilled with the result. So I don't want to have a favorite because there's so many. I mean, there are others that are not like those. Those are all what I call repurposing projects. So I like to see properties that get repurposed. You have another major project that I love right now that's going on is MetroCare, which is the Dallas behavioral health organization for Dallas County. They are doing almost $100 million new development on 11 acres, not too far from here, that will have a clinic to serve children and adults. They will have a professional services building that will provide support. And this will become a national location for mental health. But it's primarily for Dallas County, but I think it's going to attract people from all over the country who are going to want to come and see what a fabulous location this is for serving people who have a variety of mental health issues. So there are lots and lots of different stories, and each one of them is really like a child. I mean, it's hard to have a favorite because they're all so special. So thank you for asking about it.
Those are all really great examples. And I do remember decades ago now with the Children's Theater moving to that location. I would take my kids when they were down on Cedar Springs, in that temporary building that was
They were there
permanent.
13 years
I know.
in that temporary building.
I know.
And it was very nice of the Hunt family to let them use it for 13 years. And then they were major donors to the theater. So it was very special to everyone.
This isn't really switching gears. It's kind of continuing on, I think, what you've been talking about executive directors or board people having the vision. So my question is that executive directors or CEOs of nonprofits have too much to do, and their physical space is usually not a priority until something goes wrong, or it becomes too obvious that they're running out of room to deliver their services. What can a nonprofit leader, whether it's the executive director or board chair, do to avoid a situation like that?
Well, I think that all boards should have a facilities committee.
Mm.
And that facilities committee needs to meet regularly to talk about the facilities. But as part of the whole board process, real estate needs to be part of any strategic plan. So, Diana, when you're working with one of your clients, there needs to be a section on real estate. And that if you are planning and you're looking at all your alternatives and you're keeping up to date and you have all the information about your leases and you have experts that are helping you, then you rarely will find yourself in a crisis. Typically, a crisis in real estate happens when there's a fire or there's a flood, or a tornado or something like that. When that happens to one of my clients, they're calling me and I'm jumping in and finding them a temporary location. Occasionally, there'll be a situation where the ownership falls apart and the bank forecloses or something like that happens. Depending on how the lease was negotiated, it may be that the nonprofit is forced to leave, which would, in that case, probably all the tenants are being forced to leave, but that's very rare. So the real estate's not going to cause a crisis. To me, it's the planning. That's the crisis. That makes any sense. Yeah.
Or lack of planning.
Or the lack of planning.
The lack of planning.
Yes.
Well, I know few organizations have facility committees or plans. And it is like, oh my God, we can't have our summer program because we don't have a classroom. I mean, it's like kind of down to the wire like that. That seems to be often the case.
And I get calls like, this year I had a nonprofit call me and say, oh my gosh, the place where we've been doing our assembly of all of our holiday gifts to our clients has fallen apart. We had a location for 3 weeks. Can you help us? Well, in that situation, I reach into my bag of trusted, wonderful landlords that I know who are philanthropic and generous, and I'll go and beg, And so I mean, I will say that for me, if there's a real crisis situation, I have some trusted landlords I can go to who will help. And that's pretty special. I mean, I think you have to be in this business long enough to have those kinds of relationships. And there are some wonderful people out there, really wonderful people. So yeah, I'm very grateful for all of that.
So to kind of take another little turn here, I want to go back to talking about your career and what you've done with the community. You've served on many boards. The one organization I'd like to hear more about is CREW, Commercial Real Estate Women, and you started their foundation too. So that organization must be pretty close to your heart.
One of the things that Margaret and I encountered, and that a lot of women that are in commercial real estate encounter, is there are very few women in commercial real estate. And in 1991, when we started, there were very few women. And the numbers haven't grown that much. So Commercial Real Estate Women was started about 40 years ago. It's grown today to about 14,000 members. It's international, 50-something chapters. The goal of the organization really is to help women succeed in commercial real estate. And it's all types of professions. It's not just brokers like me. It's also people that are in the law or accounting or title work or appraisal or all these different professions that all come together to do a real estate transaction. So we support each other in that. And men can be members as well. So we have men that are attending our meetings and supportive. So that's ultimately the goal, is to help women grow in leadership and influence and be successful in their careers. So it's very important. And because I, really had no training when I started in this business, the women in commercial real estate taught me real estate. I mean, I look back at their generosity in answering my questions, even if they were a competitor, providing me with models and templates for how to do different transactions that I didn't have access to because I wasn't working for a big company. So it was a very special thing for me. So starting the foundation was for commercial real estate women to give back on a national level. And the Dallas chapter is older than the national chapter. And I was president of the Dallas chapter as well. And I saw the model of how Dallas was giving back on a local basis and felt we should do that nationally. So we started on the national level. And today the program is oriented towards helping young women through providing scholarships and also doing research on women in commercial real estate. And are we getting anywhere in this industry? And then locally, Dallas is doing that as well. We're giving scholarships now in Dallas, and we have a wonderful program called CREW Careers, which teaches high school students all about transactions too.
Oh, that's great. Mm-hmm. To start earlier is always better.
Yes. So really, it's kind of like starting them in high school, giving them a taste, and then encouraging them to go to college and take courses in real estate, and then we provide scholarships.
Great. Mm-hmm. So how big is your foundation? I mean, how many scholarships? What's your endowment?
Gosh, I think they're giving away.
Just curious.
I want to say Dallas is giving away 15, I think. Last year it was 5. So it's either close to 15. And then I think nationally it's more like 20.
Cool.
Mm-hmm.
Very good.
Yep.
Always glad to hear about that sort of thing.
Yes, it's a wonderful organization, and the Dallas chapter has like 450 members now. So it's quite active.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
That's cool.
Yes.
Well, now I am going to switch gears again and cover one of the topics that I think is really important. And I really have done deep dives into it myself and other areas, but a gift policy for a nonprofit. I mean, again, so many organizations that I'm aware of that I've worked with or worked for don't have gift acceptance policies and procedures, much less something specific to real estate. There's going to be 3 points of this question, and I can repeat them as we go along.
Okay.
But what are the key points of a gift policy about real estate gifts that every nonprofit should know? And what are some of the major issues that can really turn a real estate gift into a nightmare, which I've heard of?
Mm-hmm.
And then is it realistic for a nonprofit to seek real estate gifts?
So I've been fortunate because I've worked with foundations as well as large nonprofits that have had significant real estate gifts. So what I got from that is every nonprofit should probably have a policy, even if you're a small one. And I have on my website, I have a template that is in Word form. People can download it and adapt it to their organization. It's just I've decided like that's my gift to everybody. Take this policy and adapt it to your organization so you don't have to start from scratch. So everybody should have that. But overall, there's some things that a nonprofit needs to know about gifts of real estate, whether they just show up at your doorstep or you seek them out. When someone comes to you and offers you a gift of real estate, you need to find out why. Why are you giving it to us? And you have to do it in a nice way, but it's like, okay, if this was such a good piece of property, wouldn't you sell this yourself? Or wouldn't you do something with it that, you could then take the cash and give that away versus why are you giving it to me? So must be an issue here. So find out what's the story about why they want to give you this wonderful gift. And I say that in parentheses because some of them are wonderful gifts. They're just fantastic. And others, there's usually something wrong, and you need to find out what that is. So that means that you have to approach this as a transaction. It is just like any real estate transaction. You need to go out, you need to look at the property, do your own visual inspection, and then you need to be prepared to hire your own professionals to evaluate it. You need to find out, for example, are there any environmental issues with this property? You need to get a title commitment. Are there some title issues with this property? Maybe there's some errors that nobody wants to talk about, but they still think they own the property. All these issues could be there, and you need to find out what are those. So the donor needs to be prepared to spend money, just like you, as the recipient, need to spend money. You need to spend money on your experts, and the donor needs to be prepared to spend money as well. And you need to negotiate with the donor, which is, we want you to also donate the funds for our inspections, or we expect you to pay for the title policy, or, all the different things that go into a transaction, because you're going to have legal fees as well to receive this gift of real estate. So basically, it costs money to receive real estate as a gift, and it costs money to give real estate. That means there's got to be tax advice on both sides. So to give you an example, I had a very large nonprofit. It's a hospital. They received a house in a very expensive part of Dallas. And they were excited because they thought this house was going to be worth, in those days, like $700,000, which this was probably 20 years ago. So that was a lot of money. They didn't inspect it. I don't do residential real estate. I'm not an expert in that. So but I found a residential real estate agent to do the property again. And I oversaw residential real estate agent. Well, when we started getting into it, we discovered that the property had a bad roof that needed to be replaced. And we also discovered that it had termites. And I mean really bad termites. So we had to get rid of the termites. We had to repair the house because of the termite damage. And then the other thing about the house, one of the reasons why it wasn't selling was because it was overlooking a golf course, and there was an enormous fireplace that blocked the view of the golf course. So here you have this house that's got a bad roof, termite damage, and a bad view. So that meant that the nonprofit had to have the funds to repair the roof, replace the roof, repair the termite damage, and then take a gulp and realize they weren't going to get as much money as they thought. Now, in the end, they probably spent $80,000 with all of that. But they had the deep pockets to do that. And I think we sold the house for like $450,000. Well, $450,000 is a huge gift. But you're talking still about a long time to sell the property, and they had to put money out. So that's part of this process, and you have to be willing to turn down a donor. So if somebody calls you, the week, of Christmas and New Year's and offers you property and you have to take it right away, my answer is no, there's something really wrong. And if they offer you a property, in St. Louis, and they want you to take it, and you don't have any way of seeing it, the chances are it's probably, maybe it's a crack house or something else that's going on with this property, and you don't want it. So turn it down. So you have to be able to have this policy in hand that you can hand to a donor and say, here's our policy. And if the donor reads it and says, hey, this isn't going to work, I can't do this, then that's an easy way of turning down the property. But other thing you have to realize too is that there's some other nuances on gifts of real estate to keep in mind, which is sometimes they are offering you a partial ownership where you're being offered a property along with several other nonprofits. So maybe there are 5 of you or 4 of you or 3 of you that are receiving this gift with the anticipation that either you're going to hold it for rental income or you're going to sell it. Well, who is the nonprofit that's in charge of this? Because if you have 3 different partners and you all have different goals, you may not be able to agree on exactly what the future of this property is. So it's better if you are the nonprofit that has the majority interest or you're given the controlling interest so you can make the decisions on the future of the property. You also have things with real estate where you have rollback taxes, which is a whole other thing to explain, but it has to do with if somebody gives you agricultural property and then you sell it for commercial property, there are taxes that are owed for as if the property was commercial 5 years ago. So you're rolling back the tax burden. So when that property sells, somebody has to pay those taxes. And if the nonprofit doesn't have an attorney looking at this contract very carefully, they may find themselves stuck with paying all these taxes that they didn't anticipate selling. So that means you've got to pay an attorney to look at this document. And you may want to have a real estate agent or broker who's working with you as well to make sure you're taken care of. And one of the other major mistakes that nonprofits make is they accept a gift of real estate with something called a reversionary interest in it. And that's when someone says to you, okay, we're going to give you this beautiful, land in this forest in East Texas, and it's got cabins on it, and you can use it as a camp. And as long as you use it as a camp, it's yours. But if you ever stop using it as a camp, it goes back to me. Well, so let's say 50 years later, the nonprofit decides we don't want to do a camp here anymore. Where's the owner? How do you get him? Did you even realize that you have to give it back now? Maybe not. Maybe all the people that were involved 50 years ago, nobody remembers. And that actually happened to one of my clients. I have a lot of clients where there are reversionary interests and we got them taken care of. But in this particular case, it was a school that had been given to the Wilmer-Hutchins School District. It was Wilmer-Hutchins School District was incorporated into the Dallas school system. Dallas eventually decided they didn't need it anymore, thought they could sell the property, and then discovered there was a reversionary interest and had to go back to the donor. The donor was long since dead. There were 2 children that were somewhat estranged from each other. They're now, I don't know, their 50s or 60s. And we went to them and said, you've got this property now. Unfortunately, the property had homeless people living in it. There were drug dealers. There were animals. Had really gotten in bad shape. And I went to them and said, you need to sell this property. I said, or better yet, you need to give it to my clients because it's totally derelict and really scary. And eventually, I did talk them into giving it to my clients. It was valued at $1 million, but only before they had to come to the realization that the liability, this unexpected liability that they didn't even know about, could really hurt them. And the possibility of selling it was remote. So the reversionary interests here really made this whole thing much more complicated. So as far as gifts of real estate is have an expert, pay people to help you, and then you can reap the benefits of it. But it's complicated. It's not as easy as people wish. And you just need to approach it with caution. Probably more than you want to know about it, but
No, that's a really good answer. And I think you've already answered this third part, but I'm going to just go ahead and ask the question anyway. Is it realistic for a nonprofit to seek gifts of real estate? And maybe that depends on the size of the nonprofit?
I think, the people that are most likely to get gifts of real estate, the nonprofits, are churches and hospitals. They're the ones most likely to get a gift of real estate. People tend to do that. They leave in their estate. They have departments that are equipped to handle this. Smaller nonprofits, it's much more complicated. So when we were working with the hospital, they were able to handle it. Or if you're a large organization like, the YMCA or something like that, they also are used to getting gifts of real estate. And they have real estate departments. But for a small nonprofit, you need to bring in experts to help you to do this. Now, the other gift of real estate that nonprofits, small and large, seek is they're always asking me, well, can't the landlord donate the leased space to us? If they lease it to us for free, won't they get a tax deduction? Or if they lease it to us at a below market rate, won't they get a tax deduction for that? And the answer is no. And I have a lot of nonprofits argue with me about this, and I've written blogs about this and used legal experts to help me. You can only get a tax deduction if you give the property away in a transaction. There is no tax deduction for leasing. And the reason why is the IRS looks at it is that who owns the property. If the nonprofit owns it, then the nonprofit gets the benefit of not paying property taxes. But as long as it's owned by somebody, there is no tax deduction if it's owned by a commercial venture. So can you get a donated lease space? Yes, you can. They can donate it to you because maybe it's a cause that's important to this particular person. Maybe they have vacant space that their insurance company says, if you don't have somebody in there, we're going to raise your insurance rate. Maybe the property is subject to vandalism and they want it occupied. I mean, there are reasons why they would do it that have nothing to do with getting a tax deduction. But the chances of having that happen or have their own set of issues, because when you're in donated space, it's not unusual for it to be for a short term. The landlord may say, well, we'll lease it to you for free, but we have the right to terminate your lease in 30 days. And they're usually very short windows. And that means a nonprofit has to be prepared to move quickly to somewhere else. Mm-hmm. And so that has a lot of downsides to it too.
Right. So I'm assuming, I know next to nothing about real estate, but I'm assuming that real estate is more than land. What other types of real property are there that could be gifted to a nonprofit? And What are the questions that an executive director or board chair should ask?
If you're talking about real property is anything that's above or below the ground. It could be office building or a house or any of those things. Or it could be the minerals. It could be mineral rights. It could be water. It could be oil and gas. It could be gold. All of that is real property. Anything else is personal property. So all of that can be, and a lot there. Again, these hospitals and churches and universities also get a lot of donated gifts. There have departments that handle oil and gas leases and are used to them. You would have to be prepared to have experts help you with that. Lots of nonprofits get stock, and they have stock brokers that help them liquidate that right away. So I think all of that is just that I think every nonprofit needs to have their team of experts, attorneys, it sounds self-serving, but brokers, accountants, all of us are prepared to help them navigate these types of gifts, whatever they are, like that.
So I think also it goes back to what you said earlier is the first question should probably be, why are you giving this to us?
Yeah. You have to do it nicely, but you need to find out. And by having this policy that you can hand them really makes the job easier, because they may, as they used to say in my human resources world, deselect themselves. And then you don't have to. Then you don't have to endanger a relationship. And they can see that you're being businesslike about it. It's just it's something that you have to do to protect the nonprofit and not find yourself suddenly with a property that has terrible environmental issues.
What is the board's role when it comes to real estate issues or challenges?
The board has a fiscal responsibility to oversee the real estate, because if they're selling an asset of the organization, the board needs to approve the sale of this asset. And a smart executive director or CEO keeps the board informed and doesn't spring decisions on them. So I think the worst thing you can do is be working on a transaction and all of a sudden you realize, oh my gosh, I've got to get board approval for this. And then the board isn't prepared. The board doesn't know anything about it. Now, are there sometimes opportunities that come along and the executive director, CEO has to act quickly? In that case, then the best thing for that person to do is to go to their board chair and to their board treasurer, their facilities committee chair if they have one, but the key members of the executive committee, and get them thoroughly briefed as quickly as possible. And then get it to the board. And that means you've got to spend that time to individually talk to your key leadership and get them comfortable. And that may be something you do over a period of just a couple of days. And it can happen when you have a sudden opportunity to either purchase something or sell something that you weren't expecting. But generally speaking, if the board is kept informed and the board is looking at all of the real estate that you have and understands the portfolio, and you have either on a staff level, a facilities committee, and a lot of my larger nonprofits have a staff facilities committee that then goes to the board facilities committee and help the board see the transactions and what's going on. That really helps. I have several nonprofits now where I meet monthly with the staff to go over all of their real estate. Now, these are larger nonprofits that have multiple sites. But even if they're in smaller organizations that may have 2 or 3 or 4 different sites. Because in a community like Dallas, when you start to think about Dallas and Fort Worth, and then you move into far north, Texas, when you're looking in Sherman and McKinney and places like that, and Denton, and then you go farther south, it's getting much more complicated. When you have an 8.5 million population, you have locations everywhere. So that really means you need to understand the portfolio, and the board needs to understand it as well and be kept informed. And I think an informed board is less likely to resist.
Good point. Good point. Maybe particularly even now, that maybe understating it to say that we are in uncertain times. What advice would you give to nonprofit leaders about their real estate or their, where they offer their services to anyone who's listening to our conversation today?
Well, I think you should always be evaluating your real estate. And most leases, you don't usually have all your leases expiring at the same time. So they're rolling. And that means you need to be looking at the leases that you have and evaluating, for each one, do we want to stay? Do we need the same size? Should we shrink? Do we need to enlarge? And so if you're doing that all the time, it helps you because then you don't make decisions in a panic. You don't make smart decisions when you're panicking. And I think that's the part that is trying to keep flexibility and understanding that leases are more flexible because they can terminate, or we can go back to a landlord and try to negotiate a lower rate temporarily or a suspension of rent for a period of time. The landlords don't usually let you off completely, but they may say, okay, look, like during the pandemic, I had landlords that said, look, we'll lower the rent right now, but we'll put it on the end of the lease. So you can usually negotiate something with the landlords. But if you try to do something quickly, like you want to sell something fast, then you're going to be in trouble because a panic sale is really hard to do. We call them fire sales. They generally they take much longer. And so it's hard to sell like that. But the other thing a nonprofit should do with their board is you need to always look at your excess land and decide, are there properties that we don't need anymore? I have found that land around a corporate headquarters or the major location where the nonprofit's providing services, that land generally you need to be very careful about selling because what you're doing is you're reducing the options of future boards and leadership. And they're going to curse you if you've sold off too much and now they can't build a second building or they don't have enough room for a children's playground or whatever. So those, I would say, let's really approach those cautiously. But if you've got some parcel somewhere else that somebody bought a long time ago and nothing's ever happened with it, okay, maybe now's the time to sell it. But do it thoughtfully and realize that it doesn't happen quickly. And I think the hard thing to understand is real estate is not a liquid asset. That's the hard one.
Good tip.
Mm-hmm.
To wrap up our conversation, I like to ask this question. What is the one thing from our conversation that you want our listeners to remember?
I think I put in 3 things. I'd say first is that be prepared to spend money on experts. That nonprofits make the best decisions and see the most economic benefit from their decisions when they hire experts. And they need to be prepared to do that. Real estate brokers are helpful because we typically know all the people. We can help put together your team of attorneys and title companies and all those people. A good real estate broker can help pull together those experts for you. Second is, as I said earlier, real estate is not a liquid asset. So when you decide to sell something, it's not going to happen quickly. And you may be lucky and maybe somebody makes an unsolicited offer for something that you own. But again, it's almost like a gift of real estate. Like, okay, do they know something about my property that I don't know, that they're making this offer? And maybe I should hire an expert to help me make this decision. So, I had this last year. A nonprofit came to me and said, we have an offer for our property. Somebody wants to buy it. Should we go ahead and sell it? And I said, well, maybe there's somebody else that might want it. Maybe we need to put it on the market. We're gonna lose this guy. I said, well, you might, but let's see. Well, guess what? I got him a better price. And it worked out for them. It's worked out actually beautifully because I sold it to another nonprofit and they're now sharing the building and it's working out really well. And the last thing was, if you do all the things I think we've discussed, you'll be making the organization, I think, more sustainable and more efficient and better to handle all those uncertainties that we've been talking about. If you've been doing all of this and you have done your homework, even though we may have challenges in our economy, your organization will be the one that thrives.
Okay, everybody, remember those 3 points. Eliza Solender, I want to thank you for being my guest today on About Fundraising, the podcast. It's very interesting, and it's something, real estate is not something we talk about much in the nonprofits world, so thank you very much.
You're welcome. It's been fun.